Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to another Facebook Live from Alzheimer's Orange County. My name is Melissa Klaeb. I'm the Director of Education here at Alzheimer's Orange County, and I'm joined this morning, as we are each month, by Dr. Miriam Galindo. I'll introduce her in a second. But first, I want to thank today's sponsor, Town and Country. They're a nonprofit, faith-based continuing care retirement community, and they have multiple levels of care. They have independent living, assisted living, a 5-star rated skilled nursing and rehab, and coming next summer, a memory care community called Grace Gardens Memory Care. So we're looking forward to that for them. And for almost 50 years, this beautiful community has provided exemplary care, top quality living environment at an exceptional value. And so we are so thankful for their sponsorship this month for our Facebook Live series, as well as last month. And we could not do this without them. So thank you, Town and Country. If you're interested in learning more, visit tcmanor.com. I put the link in the comments there. Hello, Dr. Galindo.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good.
Good.
It's good to be with all you, although I'm missing seeing people face to face, aren't you?
I miss it. I totally miss it. Yeah, there's just an element that's just missing when we do these. But at least we have this technology, and we would love to hear from anyone out there. Share your comments, your questions. Makes us feel like we're connecting with you in some small way. So as we go on today, please feel free to do that. So typically, Dr. Galindo and I talk about what we call behavior changes in our loved ones that have cognitive changes, whether it's due to Alzheimer's or another type of dementia. And we are going to talk about that today, but we're going to reframe it a little bit and talk about distress, because I think many times, the word behavior has a really negative connotation, and it causes us to kind of prescribe some judgment immediately to what's going on. And I think words really do matter. And if we reframe what we're encountering as distress, and how can we help this person? How can we change our approach? How can we alter the environment? Things that we talk about all the time, but kind of just reframing it in a different light. And so hopefully that's helpful to you today. And so, yeah, I'm going to put the slides up here. Give me one second. So let me figure out the best arrangement for this. It always does something different to me. Okay, so let's start by talking about what is distress when we talk about distress. And distress is often, more times than not, the result of an unmet need. So do you want to talk a little bit about that, Dr. G?
Yeah, absolutely. And you make a very good point. Typically, when we talk about caregiving for dementia, persons with dementia, we run the risk of using terms like aggression or combative, or he really lashed out at me, or she really lashed out at me, resistant. So there is some element of judgment, especially when we feel helpless. We're liable to throw up our hands. When we talk about words like distress, then we can stay focused on what's going on inside our loved one. And that's the key to what we're going to talk about today, is how do we stay focused on what's going on inside our loved one instead of feeling like we just want to throw up our hands and give up. So in this case, distress is often the result of an unmet need, meaning the behavior that you're seeing is reflecting a need. And we as caregivers are challenged to be good detectives and figure out what that need is. Behavior is not meaningless. It's not intended to annoy you or frustrate you. It's not personal, although sometimes it feels like it. It's really about a need that's going unmet, and this person is trying their best to communicate to you what it is. And so again, we as caregivers need to be good detectives and figure out what that is.
Absolutely. And I'm just thinking about how many I'm trying to think all the needs that I can think of, all the potential unmet needs, and there are just so many. And we'll talk about some of them today as we go on, but I mean, we're talking everything from physical needs, right? Hungry, thirsty, needing to use the restroom, pain, too cold, too hot. I mean, we've got all the physical, and then we have emotional needs. We have the need to be loved, the need to feel secure, the need to feel like you have some autonomy or choice over your day. And so, I think when we start to think about all the potential unmet needs, and instead of just seeing the immediate problem, the immediate distress as something we just need to fix, trying to take it a step beyond and think, how can we be kind of, serving this person, this person's core needs in such a way that hopefully this distress happens less and less often because they feel like they're being taken care of. So that's where we're kind of headed. So,
and I'm going to add one more, if you don't mind, Melissa, because you alluded to it, but I'm going to say it just to reinforce it. And that is, oftentimes underneath the behaviors that we're seeing, even if it looks like anger, there's a lot of fear. And sometimes as caregivers, I think a lot of times as caregivers, we're called upon to be the voice that says it's going to be okay. Whether it's said in your behavior, your attitude, or words that come out of your mouth, or a smile on your face, something to convey we're okay right now. Because if you can imagine, and we'll talk more about putting yourself into the person's shoes, but imagine the level of fear that must occur when things are not the way they seem, when your brain is not interpreting the world around you in the way it used to. So we'll reinforce that more, but I just wanted to underscore the importance of recognizing there's a lot of fear going on underneath the behaviors.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for pointing that out. And validating that fear, I think, is a little bit of a skill that we need to figure out how to best do for that person. We will talk about that in a little bit. So we've talked about this before. I think it was last month, maybe the month before as well. And this is just an important slide, I think, because it's typically a treatment option that is used to kind of quote manage these behaviors. And so if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about why this really isn't a recommended, definitely not a first line treatment, and hopefully something that we can avoid entirely if at all possible.
Yeah, we actually talked about this in brief on our presentation on music as a non-pharmacological intervention for behavioral and personality changes. And what we're going to reinforce here again is many times psychiatric medications are used to manage behaviors and personality changes, especially antipsychotic medications to manage what appears to be aggression. And again, we're reframing that, but appears to be aggression or agitation. And then anti-anxiety medications are often used to manage that fear and worry and distress that makes behaviors challenging. So the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid announced a new national goal just recently, December of 2019, indicating that they want to see non-pharmacological approaches used more often than just resorting or relying on antipsychotic medication. They want that reliance reduced by 15%. And again, this is based on this trend that seems to be taking place where there's an over-reliance. It doesn't necessarily mean it's not helpful. It just means that instead of resorting to that, the use of medications, they'd like to see an effort to try to behavioral interventions first. Why is it so necessary? Well, why is it so necessary to consider non-pharmacological approaches? Because, as we know, all medications have side effects. Some of the side effects are relatively benign. Some are common and you can live with them, but some are risky. And there's even a risk of death, especially with persons with dementia, especially with the elderly. And so it's very important, and that's what's indicated here with this reference to black box warning. The FDA has issued a black box warning, just meaning, hey, this is important. When you're considering persons with dementia, you're considering persons that are elderly, please recognize that there are specific side effects that are potentially lethal when you look at medications. What that means to us as caregivers is just make sure you've got a medical professional who's overseeing these medications very closely. But it also means before you resort to medication, make sure you've exhausted all behavioral interventions, and make sure when you're considering medication that the reason is it's a safety and health issue, right?
Absolutely.
And this last point on this slide, efficacy is not strongly proven. Although we tend to resort to medication, the efficacy where you balance the benefits versus the side effects or the risks has not clearly been established, especially for persons with dementia. And so that's also something to keep in mind. Just be cautious and be conservative when we resort to medication. So that's why we really emphasize let's look at what we can do, things that are within our own grasp, some behavioral approaches before we consider medications.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting because we always talk about behavior is communication, right? Essentially, or distress is communication. And so when we give these medications, oftentimes the result is a sedative effect. And you might be, quote, calming, that person down and managing that behavior. But oftentimes you're also taking away that potential communication. And so, thinking about, are we getting to that unmet need? Are we getting to the root of this distress? Are we able to then, kind of fix that underlying issue rather than just continually trying to just manage when that behavior, when that distress pops up, right? And so that kind of leads us into our next thing here, what we call non-pharmacological approaches, and why sometimes those also don't serve us well, and those tend to fail. I'll talk about the first one here. They're often reactive. It's kind of what I've been saying. They're just a quick response to what's going on. Okay, I'm going to quickly distract you or try to redirect or try to do something. And that might work in the short term, but there's a reason this distress, this problem keeps happening over and over again. It's likely because we have not addressed whatever underlying need that may be. And so really we want to get ahead of it, and we want to be proactive instead of reactive. And so that's kind of, the strategy behind that. Do you want to talk about the next one?
Yeah, the second one, and again, we'll just, the overview on this slide is don't give up too quickly. Sometimes there's a reason your approach is not working, and these are the potential reasons. So a biggie is that we make an assumption, especially like I said before, when we feel helpless in a situation, and the assumption is this behavior is totally meaningless. I'm so sick of it. This is so annoying. Instead of trying to look at what could this behavior possibly mean, and even more so, making the assumption that it is meaningful, which requires us to look at the environment through the person's eyes with the brain they have, not with our own brains, not with our own perceptions, but with a brain that is trying to cope with a disease that's destroying brain cells one by one. I'll take the third one, and then you can take the fourth
Sure.
one, Melissa. So that leads us into the environment itself. If we look at the environment through their eyes, through the eyes of our loved ones, we might recognize that the environment is too stimulating, or it is too boring, or it is too confusing, or it's not familiar, or it's too cold, or it's too hot. In other words, there's something in the environment or in the setting or in the immediate vicinity that is just not suitable to this person's needs. And it's actually creating problems rather than alleviating problems. In fact, what I always like to say is, before you start thinking about changing things, like, all right, we got to get some medication, or maybe I just need to ignore this person, or I need to change my attitude, look at the environment, because the environment itself might give you the answer, and often does give you the answer to what's going on. We might have room in our presentation today to give some examples, but that's the overview.
Absolutely. As far as the last point here, they do not enhance well-being. I think it's the entire point of being proactive instead of reactive. And I think about the quick fix, right? The quick distraction. Okay, let's quickly they're upset. I'm just gonna, do something. Let's just redirect them very quickly. And redirection and distraction is a technique that we talk about, but I think in the absence of validating what they're feeling and really trying to understand where the distress is coming from, that often backfires, and that's just going to lead you down. It could lead you to kind of an escalating situation, or just really not getting to the root of the issue. And when we talk about well-being, I've adapted a lot of today's presentation from a man named Dr. Al Power. He's written a couple books on dementia beyond disease, and they're fantastic. And he talks about 7 domains of well-being, and some of them are like the person's identity, their autonomy, their ability to make decisions throughout the day. Do they feel secure and safe? Do they have meaning in their day? Do they feel joy? These things that we all need, not just people with cognitive changes, but really if our approaches are not geared toward that kind of overall sense of well-being for that person, we're going to kind of keep running into the same issues over and over again. And so it's really difficult. This approach is not easy and it's not quick. But hopefully if we can sit down and talk through this with other people that love this person and kind of a team approach, and kind of strategize, how do we give our loved one more meaning in the day? How do we make them feel safe and secure? How do we give them more choices? And I think a lot of the distress and the behaviors that we see tend to they lessen because those needs are being met.
And I'm going to add something
to
that before we go to the idea model. You mentioned how, how important it is to try to recognize, is this person's need for joy met? Is this person's need for some independence and this autonomy met? And you're talking about something called quality of life, that truly in this journey of Alzheimer's, regardless of what's going on neurologically and cognitively, this person is still in there. And it behooves us caregivers to recognize that and value that this person has the right and to have dignity and an enhanced quality of life. Now, what does that mean when we talk about well-being? Well, one point of view is from your loved one. The other is from us as caregivers. We need to sometimes, maybe we always need to do this, I know I did, examine our own expectations and examine our values, because we might rush into imposing something onto the day, like a list of chores and accomplishments and tasks, that is actually adding to the confusion and agitation of our loved one. And we might need to take a step back when we think about well-being and say, what am I trying to accomplish here? Am I trying to accomplish a list of tasks, and to what end? We're battling about what shirt to wear right now. Does it really, really matter? And so I found myself, when I was taking care of my dad, whittling things down to 3 basic points. Is my father experiencing more joy than not today? Is he experiencing a reduction of fear, reduction of anxiety and pain? And if I accomplished those in one day, I felt like it was a successful day. If he was wearing 3 layers of shirts and we didn't get around to a shave, and the day consisted of him folding laundry and that was about it, we accomplished great things because he had more joy than not. He had a reduction in pain and anxiety and a reduction in fear. So that's what I really challenge all of us to do is, you're going to have an examination of yourself, and also really that person-centered component is empathy, that you're putting yourself into the shoes of a person who has Alzheimer's or who has some form of dementia, and they're doing the best they can with what they've got.
Absolutely. And actually, before we move on, I want to take one question from the comments. There's a question from Emmy. She says, how do you feel about using THC or CBD to help with these types of issues? Do you want to take that?
Sure. I saw that, and I appreciate you bringing it up, because guess what, Emmy? There's a lot of people who are asking that. THC is available. It's now, there's certain literature behind it, or at least stories from friends that you're hearing that this might be helpful. The thing about answering a question like that, though, is that we haven't met your particular loved one. We don't know his needs or her needs. And so in general, we wouldn't be able to comment about it. What I would ask you to do, though, is ask your provider's opinion on it, the provider who is treating your loved one, and just make sure there's no contraindications, because certainly you don't want two medications that are causing the same thing. Like, for example, something that's causing sedation mixed with something else that's causing sedation. Most notably because it could enhance the risk of falls, and more seriously, it could cause some side effects that could be harmful. So I know that's a roundabout way of saying, I've heard some good things, but I just would strongly encourage everybody that's heard those good things to make sure that you're talking to your provider. Melissa, you might want to add something on that as well.
Yeah, no, I think everything you said is spot on. I'm excited about new research that will come out and show us things about these, hopefully methods with less side effect. But I would again go to, can we look at why, your person is having distress, and can we look at those underlying needs before we go to anything, whether it be, a harder drug or CBD or something like that. I think these same methods apply. And so, yeah, I mean, it takes a little more digging, a little more detective work, but I think that if we can try to work towards, finding longer lasting solutions, that's, I think in my mind, that's always better than a pill. But thank you for your question. Keep the questions in the comments coming, please. So this will just kind of briefly go over, it's a model that we talk about whenever we talk about behavior in distress. And this is a tool that families, friends, care teams can use to kind of help explore why distress, why a certain behavior might be happening. And there's a lot within each of these little bullet points, but we'll just kind of go through it. We may kind of circle back to it at the end. But Dr. Galindo, do you want to take us through this kind of briefly, the ideal model?
Yes. Those of you who have attended our class on personality changes and behaviors will remember this model. It's a way of slowing down our thinking as caregivers and breaking it down into bite-sized components. And it follows an acrostic. IDEA. The I stands for identifying the behavioral expression. In other words, identify what the problem behavior is or what you're seeing. And I slipped there by saying problem behavior because truly you're wanting to just say, what do you see? What's the issue? And this is, by the way, after you've examined yourself and recognized, okay, this is something that's an issue I want to address here. The second part of this acrostic, explore the potential causes. Like, what could this behavior possibly mean? Because as we said before, all behavior is meaningful. And then the third or final letter in this idea model is A, for adjust your approach. And adjusting your approach is going to start with, first of all, ruling out whether there's a medical issue going on. Because as Melissa said before, there might be something physical going on. The person might, that you love, may be acting a certain way because they don't feel good. They might have an infection. They might have a fever. They might have a stomach ache. Those are the things you want to make sure you're not overlooking before you assume that there's a psychological component. So first you rule out, is there a medical issue going on? Once you're satisfied with that, the second thing to look at as far as adjustment is the environment. Look at the environment through the eyes of your loved one to see, is there anything that could be adding to this or anything that's missing that could actually help this situation? And then finally, when you're looking at the adjustment components, the third thing to adjust is you. And this is something I mentioned before. Your expectations may be too high. They might be unrealistic. Your attitude actually might be contributing to the challenge that's before you. Your own anxiety might be escalating the person's anxiety, or your own anger and frustration may be adding to the frustration and anger on the part of your loved one. So those are the 3 areas to adjust. So let's go over this again. So we identify the behavior, we make it as objective as possible. Here's the issue. You explore the underlying causes, the meaning behind the behavior, and then you adjust something. And the 3 things you're going to adjust are either, is there a medical issue? Do I adjust the environment, or do I adjust my own attitude? Notice I never said you're going to adjust the person, because you can't. In fact, if you haven't noticed already, trying to get anybody to change who doesn't want to change is not going to work. So the only thing we can possibly change when it comes down to it is truly ourselves, right? So that's why I say that.
Absolutely. I think a couple of points that I wanted to make. In the early days of caring for my mom, because I cared for my mom for a long time as well, and I did not realize how much of an impact my own attitude was having in our exchanges. I really did not. We talk about, as a person kind of starts to lose elements of their cognition, their emotional self often becomes much larger, plays a much larger role. They become more in tune to what other people are feeling. It's like the sixth sense they develop. And she really could pick up on if I was even a little bit annoyed or frustrated, and that would translate. And once I started to kind of realize how much of an impact my own demeanor had on her, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm contributing to escalating this situation. And so that required a big shift in the way that I related to her. That took a long time. I mean, I want to say years probably, and I never really got it right. But it definitely takes some work, and don't beat yourself up, caregivers. We've all been at kind of the beginning stage and learning how to do better. The other thing I wanted to mention in the identifying the behavior, I think that's one of the hardest parts for me, is just withholding judgment completely and really just being as objective as possible in identifying what I am seeing. What is the expression? What is the who? Is it me? Is it someone else? When is it happening during the day? What exactly is going on? What preceded this distress? What made it better or worse, if anything? All of these elements really matter. And so being as objective as possible is really important before we try to then go to the explore and see, okay, can we brainstorm what might be causing this? Just and keeping a log, and we'll talk about that as one of the strategies, and really writing this down, because something will happen and we're all busy, and then we'll kind of forget about it, and it'll happen again. And I think a lot of times, if we're able to keep a little bit of a log and keep a journal or a history, then we can really be a little bit more proactive in going forward. So there's a lot to unpack in this little slide, but we just we go little by little and try to do the best we can.
And I'm going to add something too.
Yeah.
You mentioned just recognizing that your attitude was affecting your mother, and you presented it as if recognizing, oh gosh, when I'm stressed out, she's going to get stressed out. But it's important that we also recognize, hey, I just noticed something. When I'm in a good mood, she's in a good mood. And the reverse is also true. There are 2 things that those of you who are caregivers out there know to the core of your being. And that is what Melissa pointed out, that instinct, that intuition, the empathy, that seems to transcend whatever brain damage is going on in your loved one. That ability to be very attuned to others and what's going on with others. And so if we recognize that our loved one picks up on our stress level and our irritation and anger and anxiety, that helps us also recognize that when we're in a good mood, or when we can convey positivity and a smile and a hug and a touch, that can do some magic. And the other thing too, if you'll remember from those of you who saw our video on music as a nonpharmacological intervention, The addition of something into the environment might make all the difference. So, for example, music seems to have a profound amount of profound impact on behavior. And it seems to reach similar aspects of the brain that transcend the damage of dementia. And so sometimes just the addition of soothing music, a soothing environment, a smile on our faces, a lift in our voices can make the biggest difference. Just as Melissa had pointed out, the opposite can also be true, right? So this is where that exploring the meaning, yes, we're looking at the meaning for that loved one of yours, but when we explore the environment, we can also see, is there something I'm doing? Is there something that's missing in this environment? Is there something that I could add to enhance the joy in this environment? So yeah, you make a very good point, Melissa, that recognizing that can be sometimes the key, the golden key.
Absolutely. There's lots of those that we learn along the way. I think this quote kind of sums up what we've been talking about. Can we step back objectively from, a distressing situation? Can we ask, it's a big ask of ourselves, but can we ask, what is this person trying to teach me right now about my approach? And so it really takes a little bit of level of kind of humility and being able to, take, not necessarily just blame ourselves for everything, but just to kind of step back and say, am I potentially escalating the situation? How can I be a calming presence? How is my attitude, kind of contributing to this? What does this person have to teach me? It's amazing when you kind of flip the script like that, just what other things can come to mind and what you can learn from a situation.
Yeah. You start to listen with your heart instead of your physical ears.
Absolutely.
Because the communication becomes very different. What you're saying may not be understood in the way you are intending, and what your loved one is telling you may not be coming across the way she or he is intending. And so you have to develop eyes and ears to ask these questions and to hear the response, but it may not be audible and it may not be something that's visual. It's something that touches your heart. And so you become a heart detective. You really do.
Yeah. Great. One more kind of quote that I think sums us up really nicely before we start to talk about some tangible things we can do. What it truly looks like to actually validate somebody's expression. We talk about the importance of validating someone a lot, but we don't often explore what that really means. And it really does mean it is your right to feel the way that you do without judgment or blame. That is really difficult to do, especially in the moment, in a heated moment, to kind of step back and say, okay, whoa, this might be getting out of control here. But to be able to validate. And I love, I just read something from Teepa Snow the other day, who I love, dementia expert, and she gave a kind of a practical example of how to validate. And she said, if someone's kind of stammering or saying some words, try repeating a couple of the words that they're saying and then ending it with a question, or kind of making your tone seem like a question, just so that they know that you are understanding what they're putting out there, rather than just trying to immediately calm them down if they are upset or agitated, coming in and just at a level of understanding first, saying, I know that you're upset. I know that you're fearful, something you bring up a lot. And then being able to kind of, be a calming presence. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I do. I think that the level of grace and forgiveness that there's such a there's a calming, reassuring way. This is such a big concept, and I'm trying to whittle it down. So I think one of the most powerful things that I was able to do during my own experience, and certainly with people that I've worked with in my professional life, just asking for forgiveness, to simply say, I'm sorry, and to take the fall without any kind of reactivity. So, for example, there might be things that are going on that are distressing your loved one and making them upset. And you could certainly argue and say, well, I didn't do that. That wasn't me. Those holes were there before. That dirt was there before. That's not my fault. You could go all day long professing your rights. But in the end, what have you accomplished? Have you achieved peace, and have you enhanced the joy of this loved one in your life, and your own joy for that matter? So it goes miles to say, I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? And what you end up doing is breaking down that wall between you and this loved one in such a simple way. And touch is the same, and a smile is the same. It's such a free gift that we can offer, and why not? So there's a lot of free gifts like that come at our disposal. Forgiveness, or asking for forgiveness and saying I'm sorry, are big ones.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry is so powerful. I'm so glad you said that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I was trying to help. I'm sorry this happened. I'm sorry that I made you feel XYZ. And also praise. Thank you. I know this was hard. Thank you for trying. Thank you for working with me, even if it was a disaster, because they will remember the way that interaction made them feel. They will remember, was this a positive? Was this a negative? Right. Every time I go into the bathroom, I don't like this feeling. It's a negative feeling. And how can we turn that around? How can we make that a positive interaction?
That's right. That's right.
Absolutely. So this is kind of our wrap up, but also, we've talked about some of these things, but I think these are really, really good things to think about. How can we be proactive instead of just always responding to distress in the moment? How can we sit down? And it does require some planning. It requires a little bit of talking with others, of taking some notes, thinking about big picture things that aren't just in the moment. And so, the first one here is bring together a care partner team who, whether it's informal or formal, if it's just, you at home with your loved one, who else interacts with you guys? Is it a relative? Is it a neighbor? If it's professionals, who spends time around this person? And just put your heads together. And what do we know about this person? How can we work together? What situations have we encountered? And how can we, share that knowledge with each other? I think that's really important, rather than just, being in our own little silos and trying to do it all on our own. It's much better with a team. And the next one goes with that as well, taking notes, which we kind of alluded to earlier. Maybe it is as formal as writing out the idea model, what worked, what didn't work, or maybe it's just taking some notes. Hey, I've noticed that, in the mornings, this happens, or at nighttime, this tends to happen. And, just having somewhere to brainstorm from, having somewhere to talk to others about it, talk to the care team about what's happening. How about making sure the person is very well known? Why don't you talk a little bit about that? We talked a little bit about it before, but I think this one's so important.
The familiarity. Yeah, there's trust is vital. Because just like we talked about with a smile or a positive attitude, this the ability to recognize faces becomes more and more compromised for persons with dementia. And so when there's a familiarity, that this person is there day after day, or at least every few days, there's a familiarity that helps this loved one feel that there's trust and will accomplish, tasks. I think too, I'm going to add, since we're on that subject of the partner care team, when we talk about very well known, make sure the person is very well known. Also recognize that some people are able to accomplish things that other people aren't. So when you have a
Absolutely.
team, when you have a team, you may find that you can't get very far asking your loved one to do something, but your husband can, or your son can, or the uncle can. Right. So sometimes just a switch in gender, or sometimes enlisting the support of an authority figure, like maybe I have no effect in getting you to take medication, but if I appeal to your love and respect for your medical professional, then maybe you'll do it for your doctor, that sort of thing. So by care team, we're talking about everybody under the sun that you can possibly think of. And very well known, you can substitute very well respected, or which person seems to have an impact on what behaviors.
Absolutely. We talk a lot about being able to see through their eyes, and you mentioned as well seeing through their brain. I don't know if I'm putting it the same way, but yeah, absolutely, because of the changes they're just experiencing the environment so differently. One story that comes to mind that I read was a woman in a care community who kept getting out of bed every night and kind of wandering the halls, and she was also at risk for falling, and they just couldn't figure out. They did a really good job trying to assess her needs. Did she need to use the restroom? Was she thirsty? All these things kind of kept coming up empty-handed. And finally one night, one of the staff laid down in her bed. They took this very literally, and there was a glare just right from the hallway hitting them in the face, and they turned out that light, and lo and behold, she was able to not get, and is it always that simple? No. But it wasn't that simple. If that person had never done that, they might have never known that. They might have then said, okay, well, it looks like maybe we need to start using a sort of medication, something like that. So make sure you've really exhausted and really, you got to get creative with this, see through their eyes. It's, again, easier said than done.
And I love that you're emphasizing, oftentimes it's literally seeing through their eyes.
Yeah.
And I've done that. I've done that. As you were talking about that, I thought, oh, I remember I did that, laid down in my dad's bed, or sometimes even trying to see things from my my clients' eyes, just trying to understand their point of view with the brain they have. Yeah. Definitely. And then the last point here, looking beyond the present challenge to enhancing the well-being, that goes back to something I said before, which is examine your values, look at the issue within the bigger context. It may be that it's not as big a deal as we're making it. It may be that it's a big deal, but within the context of other things that are going on, we're making it more complicated, or it has become more complicated. And if it were ferreted out and associated with something positive, it would be more manageable. And I'll give you a little example of what I'm saying here. Let's say our goal is more joy than not. That's what we're trying to accomplish. But trying to get your loved one to take medication has become such a pain in the neck. And every day it's a fight. Well, we can step back and say, within the bigger context, this, challenge that we've got day after day is undermining our overarching goal, which is more joy than not. So what are we going to do? Are we going to skip medication? No, not necessarily, especially if it's life-enhancing medication. Can we integrate it into something positive? Yes, we probably can. And the way to do it, like Melissa said before, is you associate it with something positive, not negative. So if you want your loved one to take medication, you're going to associate it with something positive. Music, lunch, spending time together, TV time, or something as simple as we're both going to take our medication, and you can take your vitamins and they take their medication, but there's a community effort at accomplishing this goal. So that's what I'm talking about with, look beyond the present challenge, that this is just ruining my whole day. And rather try to look at the big picture and go backwards from there. I want to accomplish more joy. This is disrupting it. What can we do to bring joy to this moment? Truly, there should be very few moments that are feeling like your own peace is being thoroughly and immeasurably disrupted. It requires a lot of creativity and sometimes more brains than one, which is where that teamwork comes in. But that would be the goal, is we want your peace. We want you to have joy. We want your stress level, caregivers, to be less rather than frequent. And we want you to get through this and see a light on the horizon. And that's why we do these programs. And I think that brings us to our next slide, actually.
Yes. My favorite.
That is, yes. Take a deep breath. Wow, what a great background there, Melissa. Nice job finding a good
Thank
photograph.
you.
So, I just ended the previous slide by saying we want you to get to the finish line and see the light on the horizon. Here we've got this beautiful image here with the words, take a deep breath. Take a deep breath is intended for you as caregivers and intended for us as caregivers. And what's meant by that is you need to take care of you. You need to put more gas in your car, your proverbial car. You need to put more fuel in your lamp so that you can bring a bright light to the person that you love so much and guide them through this journey from beginning to end. And your stress level is something that we want you to manage too, because it's not good for you, and it can compromise your emotional health. It can compromise your physical health. And so the best way you can possibly minimize that stress level is bringing in some oxygen into your own body, which then, by the way, lowers your blood pressure, lowers your heart rate, lowers your respirations. Every time you're taking that deep breath, it's bringing oxygen to your own brain so you can think outside of the box and get really creative in finding solutions to these challenging behaviors. And it may even give you insight like, I bet you Uncle so-and-so would have the answer, and to connect with others and to not feel like your world is getting smaller and smaller and you're just feeling more and more burdened. So taking that deep breath there's a lot of other things that we could possibly share with you, but for today, just taking a deep breath, take 3 deep breaths 3 times a day to just get that stress level inside of you manageable so that you can manage this journey with your loved one.
Yes, thank you. What I love about this deep breath stuff is that you're actually tricking your body into like getting
Yeah.
out of that fight or flight mode, right? When
Yes,
we're in that
that's right.
flight or fight, our breathing is more shallow. It's just like, our ancestors back in the day when they were confronted with a lion or something and we're in danger and we have to run away and our body's doing all of these things. And if we can convince ourselves that the danger is past by taking that deep, fulfilling breath, then our body literally calms down. We literally change our physiology, which I think is pretty
That's
amazing. Like
right.
you said, lowering our blood pressure, lowering our heart
That's
rate.
right. And it really does. There's
Yeah.
empirical evidence that it does that. So it's not just a feeling,
Yeah.
it's literal, which means our health depends on it. Our mental health
Yeah.
depends on it. Our physical health depends on it. And what Melissa's describing is something we've referred to in other videos that are on our um, archived
They're
edition.
everywhere.
Yeah,
Facebook
and
or
yeah,
website,
yeah.
YouTube.
So the it's an automatic response that our body assumes when it perceives danger or a threat to our well-being. And that flight fight response that Melissa talked about is just what happens when we feel like we're in danger. Our blood pressure goes up, our respirations go up, our heart rate goes up, we have a dry mouth, we are jittery, we feel anxious, we feel irritable, and those things over the short term are just fine because it goads us into action, but over the long term, they can be really destructive. And like Melissa said, that deep breath somehow overrides that response and tricks our brain into thinking that we're in a Zen-like experience. and and it's protective and it's healing and it's healthful. So you don't even have to sit on a yoga mat to accomplish it. You can take deep breaths from where you are, walking from the kitchen to the bedroom, walking from the house to the car. You just slow down your steps and you slow down your breathing and you take some deep breaths that fill your entire lung capacity. And truly, you're going to feel a big difference in your body.
Absolutely. And Laura commented, love the reminder to take a deep breath. Can't say it without even doing it now. I feel the same way. If I ever see it or if someone's talking about it, I feel myself doing it. And it's just it's amazing, the just kind of calm that tends to wash over you. And I think it's probably one of our most underutilized methods or tools.
Yes.
So thank you all for being with us today. As usual, we have our resources here, our helpline. Please call us anytime. Well, you can call us in business hours and you can leave a voicemail if it's outside of business hours. But we have trained professionals and social workers ready to take your call. Hang with us on Facebook. We, do these lives almost every Tuesday. We have other things going on. Visit our website. We have other classes that aren't on Facebook. We have a Zoom class tomorrow on advanced care planning. If that's something you're interested in, that's going to be a great class. Next week here, I'm going to be joined by Kim Bailey. We're going to be talking about assisting our loved ones at home with some personal care tasks, like bathing and mealtime and things like that. So come join us for that discussion. And we have a couple more classes this month as well. So yeah, go check out our website. We've got a lot going on there. And again, we thank you. We thank Town and Country so much for your sponsorship. And thank you, Dr. Galindo. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Melissa. It was fun spending time with you, and all of you. I can see your names and your comments and your good mornings. It's so fun to spend time with all of you, and I look forward to seeing you face to face at some point.
Absolutely. We can't wait. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.